Welcome to the Brothers in Crime podcast.
We are brothers.
We talk about true crime.
We don't take ourselves too seriously.
And you shouldn't either. If you're listening to our podcast, then you've probably, at the very least, heard of Laci, Connor, and Scott Peterson. Recently, this case is back in the news because the Los Angeles Innocence Project has taken Scott on as a client. But when Laci disappeared, her body was found, and then Scott was tried. This case was covered by the media pretty much 24/7. Now let's talk a little bit about Laci. She was born on May 4th, 1975. Her parents, Sharon and Dennis, met in high school, and they owned a dairy farm west of Escalon, California. Laci had an older brother named Brent. He was 4 years older. Laci had worked on her parents' farm from an early age and also enjoyed gardening with her mom. Her parents divorced when Laci and her brother were pretty young, and Sharon took the kids and moved to Modesto, California. But Laci and Brent still visited the dairy farm on weekends. Sharon remarried a man named Ron who helped raise Laci and Brent. And I had said that her parents split when she was young. Well, Ron had been in Laci's life as a father ever since she was just 2 years old. In junior high and high school, Laci was a cheerleader. After graduation, she went to California Polytechnic State University, or Cal Poly as it's also known. Laci majored there in ornamental horticulture. Don't you have an ornamental horticulture degree, Bob?
I didn't even know there was a freaking thing. Are you serious?
I'm not exactly sure what it is. It made me think of are you like I don't know if that's like you're a florist or if it's like a gardening, but like on a profession. I'm not sure. So, hey, listen, if you know something about ornamental horticulture, hit us up on social media, send us a message, tell us about it. We'll post about it. Laci was also known for her dimples and big smile. And if you've seen pictures of her throughout all this media coverage, then, you already know that.
She's pretty. She's very pretty.
Yeah, and her sister Amy testified during pretrial proceedings that Laci thought the world of Scott.
There's her first mistake.
Right. So Scott was born on October 24th, 1972, just a couple years older than Laci, in San Diego, California. His father, Laci Peterson, owned a crate packaging company, while his mom, Jackie Latham, had a boutique called The Put On in La Jolla. Scott was born into a blended family with Lee and Jackie collectively parenting 6 children from previous relationships. Scott was their only child together. In their modest 2-bedroom apartment in La Jolla, Scott shared quarters with his half-brother John. And Scott took up golf pretty early on and quickly excelled at the sport.
The sport? Golf is not a sport. Golf is old men getting outside to get some vitamin D and not rust, and young, preppy, rich people that don't have anything better to do. A sport? Please.
So by 14, Scott was a better golfer than his dad. Scott had ambitions to play professionally, and he pursued that dream alongside another guy who was working pretty hard to turn pro, a guy you might have heard of named Phil Mickelson. They attended the same high school and actually played golf together. Scott was emerging as one of San Diego's premier junior golfers, and in 1990 he enrolled at Arizona State University, where Mickelson also decided to attend. Now, while Scott was grappling with the realities of collegiate golf, his dad has testified that Scott started to feel like he was a bit out of his league playing with some of these world-class teammates he had. He hit a little bit of an unexpected detour when allegations surfaced regarding his conduct during a recruiting visit.
Oh, color me surprised. What kind of misconduct are they alleging?
So, Randall Mell, a sports columnist with the Sun-Sentinel out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, wrote a little bit about what happened. Pro golfer Chris Couch, who was from Fort Lauderdale, went to Arizona for a recruiting trip, where then freshman golfer Scott Peterson was assigned to show him around. From Mell's column, it says, quote, "While there's been much speculation about what happened to Scott's abbreviated bid to make the golf team at Arizona State all those years ago, Chip," that's Chris's dad, says that he knows what happened. And he goes on to say, quote, "I got Scott Peterson thrown off the golf team." The article continues, Chip said when he picked up Chris at the Fort Lauderdale airport after the recruiting trip, he was upset to see his son was suffering from a hangover. "I have my way of finding things out, and I found out that Scott had taken Chris out drinking and meeting girls." Chip said, "I called the golf coach and told him I was very unhappy about that. Chris was the #1 junior in the country, and they really wanted him to play there. The coach called back and told me that he had thrown Scott Peterson off the golf team." Chris ended up choosing to play at the University of Florida, where he made the winning putt to clinch the national championship for the Gators in 1993. And Scott played golf at, how would you say that?
Cuesta?
Sounds good. College in San Luis Obispo. So, you got any thoughts there, Bob, about all of that?
It's kind of screwed up. I mean, a college guy takes another college guy out for drinks and to meet girls. I don't really think that's a felony.
Right.
So I'm sad to say I have to take Scott's side. Plus, it's dirty, the kind of dirty that's typical of sports, pretty much from probably Little League, but at least high school all the way up through the pros. It's who you know.
Yeah. One thing that I thought was kind of funny about the reporting was it talked about how, and this was written this way in the article, so I kept it this way. That he was unhappy about his son suffering from a hangover. I thought you'd have something to say about that for sure.
I can empathize. I have suffered greatly from a hangover now and then. And if you don't think it's suffering, oof.
So back to Scott. After all this went down, he redirected his academic pursuits. First at the Cuesta, is that how you said it?
That's what I'm guessing.
All right. If you're from that area, California, let us know. So first at Cuesta College and then later at Cal Poly, where he found his niche in agricultural business, graduating with distinction. In fact, he was generally revered by his professors as an excellent student. One of his professors, Jim Ahern, fondly remarked, quote, "I wouldn't mind having a class full of Scott Petersons."
Oh, dear Lord.
Yeah, I'm guessing he probably wants to take that back now. Agricultural business wasn't the only subject that Scott became interested in while he was at Cal Poly, and that is where he met Laci. Scott worked at Pacific Cafe, a restaurant in Morro Bay. Laci would occasionally visit the restaurant to see a friend who also worked there. And around mid-1994, Laci sent Scott her phone number. She also told her mother that she had met the man that she would marry. Scott later called Laci, and they started dating. As the relationship grew more serious, Scott put aside his dreams of professional golf and focused more on his business career. The two of them dated for a couple years, and eventually they moved in together. In '97, after Laci graduated, they married at this place called Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort. While Scott finished his senior year, Laci took a job in a nearby Prunedale. Later on, we'll find that this might have been around when Scott was first engaging in some extramarital activity. Now, Scott graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in agricultural business in June of '98, and the Petersons opened a sports bar in San Luis Obispo called The Shack. And they decided to put it up for sale when they moved to Laci's hometown of Modesto to start a family, and they completed the sale of that business in April 2001. And back up a little bit then, in October of 2000, the Petersons managed to purchase a cute little 3-bedroom, 2-bath bungalow. Somehow only cost $177,000, I can't imagine what it's worth today, on Covina Avenue in an upscale neighborhood near East La Loma Park. Laci took a part-time job as a substitute teacher, and Scott had a job with this place called Trade Corp USA. It was essentially just a European fertilizer company. Laci's family, including her mother and younger sister, said that Laci devoted a lot of her energy toward being the perfect housewife, and that she enjoyed cooking, entertaining, and she liked to watch Martha Stewart. In 2002, Laci discovered that she was pregnant. Her due date was February 10th, 2003. And the couple had planned to name this child, who they found out was going to be a boy, Connor. So their first kid, their son, would be, they already picked out the name for him. According to reports around this time, friends said that they never saw the two arguing and that Laci and Scott seemed like a happy couple. On December 24th, 2002, Scott left to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina around 9:30 a.m. Laci was watching a Martha Stewart show about meringue and getting ready to mop the floor, bake cookies, and walk the family dog to a nearby park. Sounds like a pretty good day to me.
This is the first part that bothers me about this dude. Look, this was probably the first, maybe the second trial that I watched live on TV. The first one was probably OJ, but this one I remember as well. Like, what kind of a douchebag? Christmas Eve, your wife's 11 months pregnant, and you're going to leave her there to clean up the house, mop the floor and shit, and you're going to go an hour and a half away on your boat? Like, I can't believe she didn't throw a fit about that.
Yeah, well, like her family said, right, she was trying to be the perfect housewife. So A neighbor of the Petersons said that she found the Petersons' dog, which was this cute little golden retriever named Mackenzie, alone outside the home and returned him to the Petersons' backyard at around 10:30 that morning. And she later testified she'd found the dog at 10:18. But another neighbor, a guy named Mike, said that he saw Mackenzie at about 10:45 as he was playing catch with his own dog. The Modesto Bee, that's the local newspaper, also reported that an unnamed female neighbor found the dog with a muddy leash wandering in the neighborhood. And that neighbor put the dog in the Petersons' yard, not observing that anything seemed out of place. Now fast forward to about 2:15 p.m. and Scott left a message for Laci saying,
"Hey, beautiful. I just left a message at home. It's 2:15. I'm leaving Berkeley. I won't be able to get to Villa Farms to get the basket for Papa. I was hoping you would get this message and go on out there. I'll see you in a bit, sweetie. Love you. Bye."
You did that way too well. Oh my gosh.
First I had to choke down the vomit in my throat for you making me read his lines.
I mean, some of my favorite parts of preparing for this is just deciding what I want to make you read. So. Oh, man. All right. So Scott said that when he returned home that afternoon, Laci's car was in the driveway. Their house was empty. He also said that he found Mackenzie, that's the dog, in their backyard, and that he related this to Laci's mother, Sharon, though Sharon later denied this in her book. And Scott went in and showered, washed his clothes, and a neighbor of Scott's later said that Scott had knocked on his door asking if he had seen Laci. The neighbor and his wife both testified overhearing Scott saying that he had been golfing that day when he tried to call Laci. A relative of Laci's would also later testify that when friends and family began gathering at the Peterson home that night, Scott said that he had gone to play golf. Now, Scott called his mother-in-law to ask if Laci was with her, and Sharon subsequently said that call was when she learned that Laci was missing. Scott and Laci's stepfather both reported Laci missing, so they both called it into the police, and the police received the report of her disappearance shortly before 6 p.m. At this point, there's, the search is on, right? Laci is, like you said, 11 months pregnant, and she's missing. So Modesto police and firefighters carry out an extensive search along Dry Creek the day after her disappearance. That search included helicopters equipped with searchlights, police mounted on horseback and bicycles, canine units, and water rescue units on rafts. A total of 30 officers were involved in the search, as well as Laci's friends, family, friends, and volunteers. At a press conference, one of the detectives on the case said that the police did not believe that Laci decided to leave without contacting any of her family, commenting that that would be completely out of character for her. The initial search and vigil that took place a bit later were organized by Laci's immediate family and friends. In those first 2 days, there were about 900 people involved in the search for Laci before community officials or police directly participated in the search and prior to this broader media coverage. So already there's this big outpouring even before the national media storm would hit the scene. But as most of you know, this story quickly attracted that national media interest. And a $25,000 reward was offered pretty quickly, and then it would be increased to $250,000 and finally even $500,000 for any information leading to Laci's safe return. Flyers and posters, blue and yellow ribbons were circulated, and the original basic version of the LaciPeterson.com website was launched by the husband of one of Laci's friends. In the end, it would be 1,500 or about 1,500 volunteers signed up to distribute information and to help search for her. As the search went on April 13, 2003, a couple who just happened to be walking their dog in Richmond's Point Isabel Regional Shoreline Park, say that 5 times fast, made a shocking discovery. They found the decomposing body of a full-term little boy, infant, in a marshy area. And to be clear, this park is located along the shore of the San Francisco Bay. On April 24th, an ABC News report stated that Connor's umbilical cord was still attached, and the San Francisco Chronicle reported that it appeared torn rather than cut or clamped, as would be the normal practice following a birth. However, ABC News later reported on May 30th that according to the autopsy, neither the umbilical cord nor the placenta were found with the body. So there's a lot of conflicting reports about this stuff early on and honestly kind of throughout the whole thing. The following day, after Connor was discovered, another person found the body of what seemed to be a recently pregnant woman. that had washed up on the eastern rocky shoreline of the bay, about a mile away from where Connor's body was found. The corpse was decomposed to the point of being almost unrecognizable as a human, and the body was missing the head and arms and most of the legs. A few days later, on April 18th, the results of DNA confirmed that these were in fact the bodies of Laci and Connor. The autopsies on both bodies were performed by forensic pathologist Dr. Brian Peterson, no relation. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm just not going to go into the details of Connor's autopsy. I just can't. The exact date and cause of Laci's death were never determined. Her cervix was intact. She suffered 2 cracked ribs, but the pathologist couldn't determine if this was before or after her death. Her upper torso had been emptied of her internal organs except for the uterus, which protected Connor, explaining the lower level of decomposition he experienced, which frankly is incredible and remarkable.
The human body is something.
Yeah. Well, and the way that everything else, all of her other internal organs somehow are not there, but then this stays intact, and it's a lot.
God made those things super duty.
Right. The pathologist was also able to conclude that Connor died in utero. This was his conclusion. He also determined that Connor had been expelled from Laci's decaying body, though when cross-examined, he conceded that he couldn't determine whether he had been born alive when this occurred. The pathologist also found meconium in Connor's bowels, which is the first stool passed after birth. You got any follow-up on that medical stuff? You look like you're thinking.
It's just all so disturbing that these two, this mother and this little baby, found their final resting place to be in this water, which that just creeps me out to begin with. But then we know what happened. The fishes and turtles and I don't know whatever the hell else lives in the San Francisco Bay, poets and baristas, they need to eat, and they don't see it as this is a person. That's just a food source. So things get gobbled up and bitten off, and it's just but it's gross and sad and upsetting.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's very disturbing. So now with the bodies being discovered, I think it's time to talk about the investigation a little bit. So Scott is primary suspect from the very beginning, right? I mean, just probability says you always got to look at the spouse. He's going to be this guy that they're going to need to either clear or look into more. Laci's this part-time teacher. She has no enemies, and she's about as low risk as they come. So, it just leaves you with, well, you have this person who really has no exposure to anything that would make you think that they're in danger of being murdered. So the spouse is going to be the most likely perp. Modesto police detectives Alan Riccini and John Bueller were the lead investigators on the case, and they were the ones who responded to the missing persons call. When they arrived at the Peterson home, Laci's keys, wallet, and sunglasses were found in her purse in a closet. Bueller told ABC News in 2017,
"I suspected Scott when I first met him. Didn't mean he did it, but I was a little bit thrown off by his calm, cool demeanor and his lack of questioning. He wasn't, 'Will you call me back? Can I have one of your cards? What are you guys doing now?'
Bueller further described Scott's behavior as
a strange combination of polite and arrogant, disaffectedly distant and impatiently irritable. He just didn't seem like a man who was crushed or even greatly disturbed by his wife's disappearance and possible death."
This Bueller guy had a thing for alliteration, didn't he?
Yeah, he was good with them words.
Yeah, he should maybe he already did write a book. I don't know. But now, Scott told the detectives that he had gone to fish for sturgeon at the Berkeley Marina, about 90 miles from the couple's Modesto home. You ever fish for sturgeon, Bob?
No. When I fish, I prefer not to use bait because it makes it more likely I'll actually catch something.
Right.
And the whole point of fishing to me is just to be on the water with beer. I just carry the pole for decoration.
Silence and beer. That's what I heard right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Although police suspected foul play basically off the bat, they didn't treat the case as suspicious within the first few hours of the missing persons report. During this period, Scott's in-laws defended him and portrayed him and Laci as the ideal couple, and public perception of Scott reflected this. As police continued their investigation, though, they grew more and more suspicious of Scott. Now, again, the discovery of Laci and Connor's bodies, they created this greater sense of urgency for the detectives, who had placed a tracker on Scott's car. And at one point, they see that Scott's in San Diego, and they're kind of afraid that he would escape across the border to Mexico. Again in 2017, Braccini commented,
I just thought, we've got to find Scott right now. He told me he was there, and that's where the bodies come up. I mean, I believe it was premeditated. He planned it. San Diego was pretty darn close to the Mexican border. Scott knew the area pretty well. That's where his parents lived. That's where he lived. So it wasn't like he was going to have to get on MapQuest to try and figure out a way to get to Tijuana.
The FBI and Modesto Police Department performed forensic searches of the Peterson home. The FBI also conducted mitochondrial DNA testing on one hair found on a pair of pliers that was in Scott's fishing boat that linked them with hairs recovered from Laci's hairbrush. The authorities also searched Scott's pickup truck, toolbox, warehouse, and boat. They found a homemade anchor in the boat that Scott had just purchased 2 weeks earlier. To be clear, he purchased the boat, and he made the anchor. But Scott told a detective that he made this anchor for the boat using a 90-pound bag of concrete, and he had used the rest of the bag to repair his driveway. A detective testified that he found a cement-like substance on the wooden bed of a boat trailer when he searched Scott's warehouse on December 27th. And that detective pointed to what he said were 5 circular areas on the trailer that had less powder than the other areas on the trailer. He also found a dustpan surrounded by the white powder and a sledgehammer. So prosecutors kind of came up with this theory that Scott had made 5 anchors and used 4 of them to sink Laci's body in the San Francisco Bay. And then after Scott was arrested, police conducted further searches in the bay in an attempt to locate the anchors, but nothing was ever found.
I remember that photo of the trailer with the 5 circle spots being shown.
Yeah, and these anchors, it's kind of hard to imagine, but, it's sort of just like if you pour this cement in like a small bucket or whatever and have some rebar or whatever kind of in there that you could use, you could tie off and use it as an anchor. So just to give you a mental picture. Now, here comes the big plot twist. To me, this is where everything changes, right? Amber Frey. In November 2002, a month before Laci went missing, Scott met a woman named Amber Frey. She was a Fresno massage therapist, and if this case is a fire, Amber is a whole 5-gallon bucket of gasoline. And what I mean by that is, you've already got speculation about Scott. He seems like he's probably the guy. And according to statistics, the cops are suspicious of him, the way he's acting, all of it. Like, it all just kind of is generally pointing to him, but there isn't that spark yet, right? It's just, he's kind of icky. Then Amber enters the picture of the investigation, and it goes to an entirely different level. You see, Amber informed police of her relationship with Scott on December 30th, 2002. Shortly after she discovered that he was a person of interest in Laci's disappearance. She told detectives that she'd met Scott on November 20th and that he had initially told her he was single. She had informed the police that on December 9th, this is 2 weeks before Laci disappeared, Scott had told her that he was a widower and it would be the first Christmas without his wife.
See, like the fact that he had a side chick is one thing. That don't make you a killer. But the stuff he's saying that just lines up with the fact that, like, he know his wife is going to be gone, I'm telling you, that for me, like, this guy was sketchy as hell when he was on the news. Like that one cop said, like, there's something creepy about him, like this quiet, arrogant thing. But then when you pop out with this, like I said, not just he got a side chick, but he's telling the side chick, oh, my first Christmas alone, my wife's dead. And then he's making phone calls from the memorial and stuff.
All right, don't get ahead of me now. I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there.
He's a bag of shit. Whether that was what said to me as the viewer that don't know shit however many miles away, like he's the dude. And then I remember the, news alerts when the boats were out in the bay, the police were searching and stuff. Like, the news doesn't know right away what they're doing. They just know police are in San Francisco Bay and they got a tip it's related to this case. It was like, oh, hell. And then when they say, yep, sure enough. And I mean, immediately, just like that cop, I'm like, wait a minute. This is where this douchebag was on Christmas Eve, leaving his 11-month pregnant wife at home. And this happens to be where the bodies were found. Yeah, he done did it. But you're right. Amber was the first big, oh.
Yeah, to me, I think this may be one of the most damning pieces of evidence in the whole case, if not the most. I mean, it's up there. The relationship's one thing, right? Like, that's bad enough. That just tells you something about his character. But plenty of husbands cheat on their wives. They shouldn't, and they don't murder anybody. But in this case, this statement, I mean...
Yeah, it's what he was saying
my
to the side chick.
first Christmas without my wife, and then she turns up missing on Christmas Eve. Like... either you did it or you are the unluckiest guy in the world. But yeah, definitely this is huge. So Fry agreed to call Scott while police recorded their conversations. And the hope was that they could get him to confess or he would implicate himself in some way. On January 15th, 2003, police told Laci's immediate family that Scott had been having an affair and showed her parents a photo of Scott with Amber. And if you've watched any TV coverage of this at all, I'm thinking it's probably the one with her in the red dress and he's in the tux. And I mean, they look like they could be married, right? It's like a Christmas party picture.
Yeah.
You remember the one I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
At this point, Sharon reaches this, she's now on board that, okay, I think Scott killed Laci. And then on January 24th, Laci's family told reporters that they were withdrawing their support from Scott, even though Scott had not officially been named as a suspect. Hours later, Amber Fry held a press conference exactly 1 month after Laci went missing. And she held the conference to explain her role in the investigation.
With her attorney, Gloria Allred.
That's right, you remember.
I do.
And this is crazy. I mean, the whole thing is nuts. But now we're going to get into, you started to go here, and I didn't want you to get there quite yet. But another just shocking piece of evidence from this case was one of these recorded calls where Scott tells Amber that he's near the Eiffel Tower, and it's New Year's Eve there in Paris, and all this noise that's in the background, this crowd noise that she's hearing and having trouble, like they're having trouble talking because it's so loud where he is. And so he tells her, oh, the crowd is huge, and they kind of wish each other Happy New Year. And he tells her, he really can't hear her, so he'll call her back when it's New Year's where she is. And the problem with that call is he wasn't anywhere near the Eiffel Tower. He wasn't in France. He was in California. Even worse than that, at that time, he was actually at the vigil that Laci's parents organized for her. So he's standing there on the phone with his mistress at his wife's vigil, and he's lying to her about being at the Eiffel Tower. Not a good look.
No, he's a bag of shit.
Right. So you remember how Scott was, like quite the golfer back in the day?
Woohoo, yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's ironic, maybe it's fitting, I'm not sure which, that he was arrested for Laci's murder in front of Torrey Pines Golf Course in La Jolla. He told police he was meeting his dad and his brother to play golf.
Bullshit. Bullshit.
However, when he was arrested, his hair and goatee had been dyed blonde instead of its normal, very dark brown or blackish color. His Mercedes had some interesting items. So, Bob, let me know if you got any of this stuff in your Mercedes right now, okay? Camping equipment, survival gear, extra clothing, 4 cell phones, 2 driver's licenses, his and his brother's, 12 Viagra tablets, and $15,000. You got any of that stuff in your Mercedes?
I have none of that. What in the hell? You're on the run, fool. Clearly, he wasn't going to play golf. He was heading to Tijuana. What do you need Viagra tablets for? You need to keep it in your pants.
Yeah, clearly that was not happening with old Scotty
You
boy.
need to cut that whole damn thing off because it's done nothing but get you in trouble and get your wife and kid killed by you. Bag of shit.
Now Scott had, and I'm kind of putting this in air quotes, he had innocent explanations for all of these items, but police were convinced that these things were part of Scott's plan to flee to Mexico, like Bob here thinks.
There's a whole lot more to this story. Come on back for the next episode and hear it. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the Brothers in Crime podcast. Feedback and suggestions are always welcome. For links and resources related to this episode, please see the show notes or visit us at brothersincrimepodcast.com. We hope you'll save, subscribe, or bookmark us on your favorite podcast site and join us for the next episode.